The great hall of the alien palace was filled with golden light. Tall pillars carved with strange patterns reached up toward a high ceiling. Soldiers in bright armor stood in rows, and nobles in flowing robes whispered among themselves. Today was a day of laughter for them, not because of joy, but because their king had found a new way to humiliate his own daughter. At the center of the hall, the alien king sat proudly on a throne of dark stone. His eyes were cold, sharp like blades, and his mouth curved into a cruel smile. Beside him stood his daughter, the princess. Her head was bowed and her hands trembled as she tried to hide behind her long silver hair. The court looked at her with pity but also with judgment. Everyone knew her shame. Everyone knew she had been declared barren. No child, no future. For their kind it was worse than death. The king slammed his staff against the floor. The sound echoed through the hall. "Look at her!" he shouted, his deep voice shaking the walls. "My daughter, a failure to her people, a disgrace to this throne." Laughter broke out in the crowd. The princess closed her eyes, wishing she could vanish. For years she had lived under this shadow, branded useless, unwanted even by her own family. But today was different, because standing at the entrance of the hall was a human. He was tall, dressed not in fine silk or glittering jewels, but in simple clothes that carried the dust of travel. His eyes were steady, his steps firm, and unlike the others, he did not laugh. He did not bow his head in shame. He walked forward as if he belonged there. The king sneered when he saw him. "And here comes the fool," he said. "The human who dares accept my broken daughter. Tell us, stranger, do you not know what you take into your arms? Do you not see the curse that follows her?" The human stopped in front of the throne. He did not look at the king first. He turned instead to the princess. She kept her eyes on the floor, tears threatening to fall, but when he reached out his hand, she lifted her head just slightly. In his gaze, she did not see pity. She did not see judgment. She saw something she had never known before: respect. The court burst into cruel laughter again. "See how he touches her," one nobleman jeered. "He must be desperate," another whispered loudly. "He does not understand what it means to take a barren bride," someone else added. The king leaned forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "Tell me, human, why do you accept her? Is it mercy? Is it madness? You could have chosen 1,000 others, but you come here and take the one who cannot give you an heir. What glory will you find in this choice? None. Only shame." The human finally looked at the king. His voice was calm but strong enough to silence the laughter for a moment. "I did not come for glory," he said. "I came for her. She is not broken. She is not less. She is my choice." The words hit the hall like a storm. Whispers turned into gasps. The king's smile faded for a moment, but then returned even sharper than before. "Your choice?" he spat. "You will regret those words. You think love can feed you? You think kindness can give you children? She is barren. You take nothing but emptiness into your home." The princess flinched at the word, her chest heavy with shame. She had heard it all her life, but somehow hearing it here, in front of the human who stood for her, made it hurt more. She wanted him to walk away. She wanted him to leave before the king's poison broke him too, but the human did not move. He took her hand gently, lifting it so the whole court could see. His fingers were warm, steady, unshaken. "If emptiness is what you see," he said, his eyes never leaving the king's, "then you see with blind eyes. She is not emptiness. She is light, and I will not let you take that from her." The hall grew silent. Even the cruel nobles had no quick laughter to throw. They had never seen anyone speak to the king in such a way. The princess stared at the human, her lips trembling. No one had ever spoken of her like that. No one had ever defended her. The king's face darkened, but he forced another laugh, louder this time. "Brave words, human," he said. "Let us see how long your courage lasts when the weight of shame crushes you. Take her then. Take this barren daughter of mine. But remember this moment. Remember that I warned you." The court exploded into mocking applause, clapping not for the human but for the king's cruelty. Yet in the middle of their noise, the human did not release the princess's hand. He leaned closer to her, his voice quiet but sure. "They can mock. They can laugh. But I will never leave you." For the first time in her life, the princess allowed herself a small, fragile smile. It was the beginning of something she had never dared dream of. And though the hall was filled with laughter, though her father sat high on his throne with triumph in his eyes, deep inside, the balance of power had shifted, because one human had refused to bow to cruelty. Because one human had chosen her, and that choice, though small now, would one day shake the entire kingdom. The palace was silent that night. After the cruel laughter of the court, after the mocking voice of her father, the princess sat alone in her chamber. The walls around her were made of shining crystal, but to her they felt like a prison. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, silver hair falling around a pale face, eyes red from hidden tears. To the world, she was the alien king's daughter, but to herself she was nothing. All her life she had lived under the shadow of one word: barren. As a child she had dreamed of growing strong, of bringing honor to her people. But when the healers had whispered the truth to her father, that she could never bear a child, her future was stolen. Overnight, the palace that should have been her home became a cage of shame. Servants bowed to her, but she could hear their whispers when she passed. Nobles looked at her with pity, some even with disgust. She had stopped walking in the gardens because children playing there always reminded her of what she would never have. She had stopped attending ceremonies because her father's eyes always burned with disappointment when he looked at her. Slowly she began to hide. She read books alone. She stared at the stars from her balcony. She built a life of silence because silence was safer than hearing the word again. And yet earlier that day something had happened that she never expected. A human, a stranger in her father's court, had stood beside her. He had spoken words that no one had ever spoken before. "She is my choice." The sound of those words still echoed in her heart. The princess touched her lips with trembling fingers, remembering the moment he had lifted her hand before the court. She should have felt shame, but instead she felt a strange warmth in her chest. A dangerous warmth, one she did not understand. Why would he say that? She whispered to herself. Why would he choose me? A knock came at her door. She quickly wiped her eyes and sat upright. "Enter," she said softly. The door opened and the human stepped inside. He bowed politely, but his eyes searched her face with quiet concern. "You did not eat at the banquet," he said. "I thought you might need this." He held out a small tray of bread and fruit. She blinked at him, surprised. No one ever noticed if she ate or not. No one cared. Slowly she accepted the tray, her fingers brushing his hand for a moment. The warmth returned, stronger now. "You should not be here," she whispered. "The others will mock you more for being seen with me." The human sat on the edge of the chair across from her, his face calm. "Let them mock," he said. "Their laughter does not matter to me." The princess lowered her eyes. "You do not understand. In this kingdom, a woman like me is worse than a beggar. Even slaves are valued more because they can at least continue a bloodline. I am nothing." The human leaned forward, his voice steady. "You are not nothing. You are someone who has survived cruelty and still holds her head high. That is more than most of them could ever do." Her breath caught. No one had ever said such things to her. She wanted to believe him, but years of pain chained her heart. "You will regret this," she said softly. "My father will not stop mocking you. The nobles will laugh louder, and I cannot give you what you deserve." The human shook his head. "What I deserve is honesty, kindness, and courage. And I see all three in you." Silence filled the room. The princess stared at him, her heart beating faster than she wished. She wanted to argue, but no words came. She wanted to hide, but she also wanted to listen. Finally, she asked in a trembling voice, "Why me? You could have chosen someone strong, someone respected." "Why me?" The human smiled gently. "Because when I looked at you, I did not see shame. I saw someone waiting to be free." Her eyes widened, and for the first time in years, she felt tears that were not from sadness, but from something she could not name. She quickly turned her face away, but the human did not press her. He simply stood, bowed again, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he said, "You may not believe it now, but one day you will see yourself as I do." When the door closed, the princess sat frozen. His words wrapped around her like a fragile cloak of warmth. For the first time, she wondered if her life could be more than whispers and mockery. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream. Outside her window, the alien sky glowed with countless stars. She whispered into the night as if afraid the walls might hear her secret. Could it be true? Could I still be enough? She held the thought close like a hidden treasure, not knowing that this fragile hope would soon grow into something far greater than she ever imagined. The sun had not yet risen when the human walked through the quiet corridors of the alien palace. The halls were dim, lit only by faint blue crystals on the walls. Most of the nobles were still asleep, but the guards watched him carefully, whispering to one another. He did not belong here, and everyone knew it. Yet he walked as if he belonged, as if he feared nothing. He stopped outside the princess's chamber. He did not knock this time. Instead, he waited until the door opened on its own. She had not slept the whole night, and her eyes showed it. But when she saw him, a flicker of calm passed over her tired face. "You should not be here," she whispered. "If my father finds out—" The human raised a hand gently. "I am not here to fight your father. I am here to speak with you." The princess lowered her gaze. "You should not waste your words on me. Everyone already told you what I am." The human stepped closer, his voice steady and low. "I know what they say, but I do not listen to their voices. I listen to yours." She looked up in surprise. No one had ever cared to hear her voice before. She had always been the silent shadow in the palace, the daughter too broken to matter. The human sat on the chair near her window. Morning light began to spill across the sky, painting the room in pale gold. He looked out at the horizon and spoke with quiet strength. "Your father thinks power comes from heirs and bloodlines. The nobles think value comes from pride and perfection, but I am human. My people know power comes from choice." The princess tilted her head, curious despite herself. "Choice?" He turned back to her, his eyes firm. "Yes. The choice to stand beside someone when the world turns away. The choice to fight when others surrender. The choice to love when others laugh. And I have chosen you." Her breath caught, and she shook her head quickly. "No, you don't understand. You cannot build a future with me. I cannot give you—" The human interrupted softly. "Do you think I came here for children? For glory? For the approval of kings?" She froze. She had no answer. "I came because I saw you," he continued. "I saw someone drowning in shame not her own, someone caged by cruelty. And I promised myself, no matter what they say, I will not let you stand alone." The princess felt tears sting her eyes. She turned toward the window so he would not see them. Her voice trembled. "You speak as if you can change the whole kingdom with words." The human smiled faintly. "Not with words, with truth. And with time, the truth will show itself." She hugged her arms around herself. "But what if I disappoint you? What if I fail?" The human leaned forward. His voice was quiet but firm, every word carrying weight. "Then I will still be here. Because my promise is not built on what you can give me. My promise is built on who you are." Silence filled the chamber. The only sound was the wind outside, brushing against the balcony. The princess wanted to believe him, but fear still held her heart. "You are risking everything," she whispered. "Your honor, your place among your own people, even your safety in this palace. Why would you risk so much for me?" The human stood and walked closer, stopping only a step away from her. He did not touch her this time. Instead, he simply met her eyes. "Because I would rather risk everything for truth than live safely in a lie." Her lips parted, but no words came. She felt her chest ache, not from shame, but from something new, something powerful. It was hope, fragile yet alive. For the first time, she did not feel like a curse. For the first time, she felt seen. The human stepped back, giving her space, and bowed slightly. "I do not ask you to believe me today. But remember this. When the world tries to crush you again, when your father mocks you again, remember that you are not alone. You never will be. That is my promise." As he left the chamber, the morning sun broke fully over the horizon. The light poured into the room, warm and golden, touching her face. The princess closed her eyes and let the warmth settle into her heart. She whispered softly to herself, as if holding his words like a secret treasure. Not alone. Never alone. And though fear still lingered, though the shadows of her father's cruelty still loomed, something inside her had changed. A seed had been planted, a seed of hope born from a human's promise. That seed would one day grow strong enough to defy a king. The days that followed were heavy with whispers. Everywhere the human walked, eyes followed him. Some looked with curiosity, others with scorn, but most with laughter. In the palace halls, servants hid smiles behind their hands. Nobles made cruel jokes when he passed, pretending not to care if he heard. "The human has lost his mind," one said. "Who would tie himself to a barren branch?" Another laughed. "Even pity has limits," a third whispered. The human ignored them, but their voices always reached the princess. She heard the words in every corner of the palace, and each one was a knife in her chest. No matter what the human said to her, no matter how firm his promise, doubt began to creep in like a shadow. One evening, she sat on the balcony of her chamber, looking at the alien stars. The night was quiet, but inside her heart a storm raged. The human had been kind, had spoken with courage, but could kindness really stand against an entire kingdom? Could his promise truly survive the weight of shame? She touched the silver chain around her wrist, a gift he had given her that morning. Simple, delicate, nothing like the jewels of her people. Yet to her it felt heavier than any crown, because it carried his words, "You are my choice." And still, fear whispered, what if he changes his mind? What if he grows tired? What if the king breaks him the way he broke me? The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts. The human stepped onto the balcony, his face calm as always. He leaned on the railing beside her, looking at the stars. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, the princess whispered, "They will not stop mocking you." "I know," he said simply. She turned to him, her eyes full of pain. "And what if you tire of it? What if one day you realize they were right?" The human looked at her, steady as stone. "And what if I don't?" Her lips trembled.
You cannot fight them all.
"You cannot fight my father, even I. I cannot fight myself." The human reached out, placing his hand gently over hers. His touch was warm, grounding. "Then let me fight for you until you can fight for yourself." Her eyes filled with tears. "But what if I fail you?" "You cannot fail me," he said softly. "The only way you could fail is if you stopped being yourself." She wanted to believe him, but the shadows inside her heart were strong. She pulled her hand away, standing quickly. "You don't understand. I am not like the others. I am a curse to my people, a curse to my father, and soon I will be a curse to you too." The human did not move. His voice stayed calm, steady like a river that would not be stopped. "You are not a curse. You are the reason I am here." The princess covered her face with her hands. She could not stop the tears now. For so long she had carried her shame in silence. For so long she had believed no one could see her as anything but broken. And yet this man, this outsider, refused to see her the way she saw herself. But deep inside, the shadows of doubt whispered louder. How long until he realizes? How long until he leaves you too? That night the king summoned his daughter. She entered the throne room with her head bowed. The king looked at her with cold eyes. "So," he said, his voice dripping with poison, "your human still stands by you." "Foolish man. But tell me, daughter, do you think this will last? Do you think he will hold you when he learns the truth? You are barren. You are nothing. And nothing cannot give him a future." The princess's chest tightened. She wanted to shout to defend herself, but the words froze in her throat. The king's voice filled her ears, drowning everything else. When she returned to her chamber, the human was waiting. He saw her pale face, the way her shoulders shook, and he knew what had been said. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back, whispering in a broken voice, "Maybe my father is right. Maybe I am nothing." The human stepped closer, his eyes fierce, his voice unshakable. "No, you are everything. You are more than a crown, more than a title, more than what they call you, and I will keep reminding you even when you forget." She looked at him through blurred vision. The shadows of doubt were still there, but his words were light cutting through the darkness, fragile light yet real. That night, as she lay awake, she realized something terrifying. She was beginning to want to believe him. She was beginning to want to hold on to his promise. And that desire, that fragile hope, scared her more than her father's cruelty ever had, because hope was dangerous. Hope could be broken. The palace had grown used to whispers, but now new whispers began to spread. At first they were small, unnoticed, just servants gossiping in kitchens or guards talking in quiet corners. But slowly the words carried through the halls. The princess had changed. She walked with more color in her cheeks. Her steps no longer dragged with the weight of shame. Her eyes, though still shy, held a spark of life. Some thought it was because of the human's stubborn loyalty. Others thought it was simply madness. But none dared speak it loudly, not yet. The princess herself did not understand what was happening. For many nights she had cried herself to sleep. But lately she felt different. Her body felt lighter, yet at the same time strange waves of tiredness washed over her. Sometimes her hands trembled. Sometimes her stomach turned when food was brought. She told no one at first, afraid of mockery. But the human noticed. One morning, as they walked in the palace garden, she stumbled slightly, gripping the stone wall for balance. The human caught her hand quickly, concern filling his face. "You're pale," he said. "Are you unwell?" She tried to smile. "It is nothing. I must have skipped a meal, but it happened again the next day and the day after." The human's eyes grew sharper each time. He had seen such signs before back among his own people, but the thought seemed too wild, too impossible here. Still, the possibility would not leave his mind. One evening, he found her sitting beneath the glowing crystal trees, her face tilted up toward the stars. She looked peaceful, but there was a hand resting gently on her stomach almost unconsciously. The sight made his breath catch. "You feel it too," he said quietly. She turned to him quickly, startled. "Feel what?" "The change," he answered. "The signs." Her lips trembled and she shook her head. "No, it cannot be." The healers said. "They said I was barren. My father announced it before the whole court. I cannot." But even as she spoke, her voice grew weaker, uncertain. She wanted to deny it, but her heart whispered otherwise. The human knelt before her, taking her hand in his. His voice was steady but filled with awe. "Your father was wrong. They were all wrong. I think life has already begun within you." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow this time. They were tears of terror and fragile hope clashing inside her. "Do not say it unless it is true," she whispered. "Do not give me hope only to break me again." He squeezed her hand gently. "I would never lie to you. Not about this." For days she tried to hide it. But her body betrayed her. She grew tired faster, yet her face glowed with a strange new light. When she walked through the halls, nobles noticed. They whispered, confused. Some said she was ill. Others said the human's presence had bewitched her. But one word began to pass between their lips, cautious and fearful: pregnant. The king heard the whispers, and his anger boiled. He summoned the royal healers, demanding they examine his daughter. The palace held its breath as they worked in silence, their hands glowing with strange instruments. Finally, they looked at one another in shock. The eldest healer bowed before the king, his voice trembling. "It is true. Life stirs within her." The throne room erupted in gasps. The king's face turned pale, then red with fury. He rose from his seat, pointing a shaking finger at the human. "This is a trick," he roared. "A lie. My daughter cannot carry life. You bring false magic to shame me further." But the healers did not waver. "No, your majesty," they said. "There is no trick. She carries an heir." The king's voice faltered, but his pride would not break. He turned to the court, forcing a cruel laugh. "Do you not see? Even if she carries, it may not survive. She is weak. She is cursed. This is nothing more than another failure waiting to happen." The princess lowered her head, fear and doubt clawing at her. His words still cut deep even now. But the human stepped forward, standing between her and the king. His voice rang clear in the hall. "You call her cursed. You call her barren. Yet she carries the very future you claimed she could never give. This is no curse. This is a miracle, and no amount of your pride can erase it." The court fell silent. Nobles stared with wide eyes. Servants held their breath. And though the king laughed again, his voice shook with something it had never carried before: fear. That night, alone in her chamber, the princess touched her stomach with trembling hands. For the first time in her life, she felt something stronger than doubt. It was still fragile, still uncertain, but it was there, hope. And deep within her, the smallest flicker of new life answered that hope with its own quiet strength. The day arrived when whispers could no longer be ignored. The palace was alive with restless voices, like a storm waiting to break. Servants hurried through corridors, nobles dressed themselves in jewels brighter than usual, and soldiers sharpened their blades, though no war was coming. Something greater was about to happen, something the alien king had sworn was impossible. The princess's time had come. Inside her chamber, the air was heavy with both fear and hope. Healers moved quietly, their hands glowing with light, their faces pale with disbelief. The princess lay on silken sheets, her body trembling, not from weakness but from the weight of what she carried. Sweat covered her brow, and every cry of pain shook the chamber walls. The human was at her side, never moving, never letting go of her hand. His voice was steady even when her grip crushed his fingers. "You can do this," he whispered again and again. "You are stronger than they ever believed. Stronger than you know." She wanted to believe him, but in her heart, shadows of doubt screamed louder than the pain. What if I fail now? What if this ends in silence instead of life? Tears ran down her cheeks. She remembered her father's cruel words: barren, useless, nothing. But then she looked into the human's eyes. They did not waver. They did not doubt. And in them she found enough strength to push through the storm. Hours passed like an eternity. The court gathered outside, restless, waiting for news. Some prayed she would succeed. Many prayed she would fail so their king would be right. The king himself paced his throne room, his fists clenched, his face carved in fury. He wanted the miracle to die before it was born. But fate did not bend to his will. At last, the silence inside the chamber broke with a sound the palace had never expected to hear. A tiny, sharp cry. A child's cry. The healers froze, their eyes wide. One of them, shaking, lifted the newborn high, its small body wrapped in white cloth. The sound filled the air again, stronger this time, echoing like thunder across the halls. The princess wept, unable to believe what her own ears heard. The human, tears in his eyes for the first time, bent close and kissed her damp forehead. "You did it," he whispered. "You proved them all wrong." The healer approached, laying the child gently in the mother's arms. She looked down at the tiny face, delicate yet alive with power, and the world seemed to blur. Her fingers brushed the baby's cheek, and the child turned toward her touch. In that moment, the word barren shattered forever. Outside the chamber, the news spread like fire. Servants gasped, nobles shouted, guards dropped their weapons in shock. An heir had been born. The impossible had become real. When the child was carried into the great hall for all to see, silence fell. The nobles stared in disbelief. Some bowed their heads, others covered their mouths. But all eyes turned to the throne, waiting for the king's reaction. The alien king's face turned pale as stone. He gripped his staff so tightly that cracks formed in the wood. His voice was harsh when he finally spoke. This was a trick. A false child. She cannot. But the sound of the baby's cry cut through his words, louder than his fury, stronger than his denial. The human stepped into the hall, the princess by his side, the heir in her arms. His voice carried across the silence, firm as iron. "You mocked her. You called her barren. You called her nothing. Yet here stands your heir, born from the one you scorned. Your words are lies. Your cruelty is broken." Gasps filled the hall. Some nobles dared to nod in agreement. Others bowed their heads, no longer able to deny the truth. The king trembled with rage, but for the first time there was fear behind his eyes. The princess, still weak but glowing with new strength, looked at her father. Her voice shook but carried more power than ever before. "You took my dignity. You tried to take my worth, but you cannot take him." She held the child close. "You cannot take what is mine. What is ours?" The king raised his staff as if to silence her, but the hall no longer listened to him. Their eyes were on the child, on the miracle that had been born where there should have been none. And in that moment, the throne no longer felt unshakable. The day of revelation had come. The barren princess was barren no more. The human's promise had turned into living truth. And the cry of a single child had silenced an entire kingdom. The great hall had never known silence like this. Every noble, every guard, every servant held their breath as the sound of the baby's first cry echoed against the tall stone walls. The child's voice was small, fragile, but in it was a strength that no army could silence. The princess held her newborn close, her arms trembling not with weakness but with awe. She had thought herself cursed, broken, useless, yet here she was, cradling life itself. The warmth of the baby's skin against hers melted years of pain in a single heartbeat. She looked down and whispered, "You are my miracle." Beside her, the human stood tall, his eyes bright with pride. He looked not at the mocking nobles nor at the trembling king, but at her. "They cannot deny you now," he said softly. "You were never barren. You were always enough." The nobles shifted uneasily. Their whispers had turned to silence. For years they had laughed at her, pointed at her with cruel fingers, repeated her father's words as if they were truth. But now, before their very eyes, the truth cried out in a child's voice. The alien king rose from his throne, his face twisted with rage and fear. He pointed his staff at the human. "This changes nothing," he shouted. "One child does not erase her shame. You dare to mock me with this trick. You dare to stand against your king." But no one cheered his words. No one laughed with him. Even his most loyal courtiers lowered their eyes, unwilling to echo his denial. The air itself seemed to resist him. The human stepped forward, his voice calm but strong enough to fill the hall. "This child is no trick. This child is your heir. You mocked your own blood, cast her aside, and tried to bury her with lies. But life has risen where you swore it could never grow. Your cruelty ends today." The king's hand shook, his staff rattling against the floor. For the first time, he looked smaller on his throne. The princess, weak but standing, moved forward too. The child in her arms began to cry again, louder this time, as if declaring its own presence to the world. The sound rolled across the hall, breaking the last chains of disbelief. She lifted the baby high for all to see. Her voice was steady, stronger than it had ever been. "This is my son. This is the heir you said I could never give. You called me nothing, but he is everything, and through him I am whole." The nobles bowed their heads. Some fell to their knees. The guards crossed their chests with their hands, acknowledging what even the king could not deny. The palace itself seemed to breathe differently, as if the walls carried the child's cry into every corner. The king's lips trembled. His power had been built on fear, on the shame he poured into his own daughter. But now, before the court, his words were broken by a single newborn's voice. He stumbled back to his throne, sinking into it as though it had turned to stone. The human placed his hand on the princess's shoulder. His voice was low, for her alone. "You see now? You were never cursed. You were always a light. They just blinded you with lies." Tears slid down her face, but this time they were tears of joy. She turned to him, whispering, "I believe you now. I believe, because he is here." She looked down at the baby who had quieted in her arms. The child's tiny fingers curled around hers with surprising strength, as if claiming her just as much as she claimed him. The hall erupted in a new sound, not laughter, not whispers, but applause. It began with the servants, spread to the soldiers, and finally even the nobles clapped their hands together. For the first time in her life, the princess stood in the center of the palace and was not mocked, not pitied, but honored. The human smiled, not for himself, but for her. He had kept his promise. He had stood when the world tried to crush her, and now, the world itself had been forced to bend. The princess closed her eyes, pressing her forehead gently against her child's. The future was uncertain, but she no longer feared it. For the first time, she felt free. And as the baby's cry echoed one last time through the great hall, it carried more than the sound of life. It carried a new truth, that even in the deepest cruelty, hope could rise. That even in the face of mockery, love could endure. And that one human's faith had changed the fate of a kingdom.